I'm Rob Zywicki. I served in New Jersey Public Schools for over 2 decades. And during that time, I was everything from a substitute teacher all the way up to 2-time superintendent. So along the way, did all the positions in between. And then concurrently, I also taught at a couple of universities. But for the past 15 years, I've been associated with the Rutgers Center for Effective School Practices, which is a division of Rutgers Graduate School of Education. And for about 13 of those years, I helped to facilitate professional development for teachers on project-based learning. Back when Google Suite for teachers was a thing. It was brand new, and blended learning was brand new. Did a lot of professional development on using Google Apps for project-based learning and for inclusion, differentiation, and things like that. And it kind of morphed into doing a lot of professional development on multi-tiered systems of support. And since I retired, I'm now the superintendent in residence at the Rutgers University Center for Effective School Practices. So my main work there is supporting districts in doing audits and professional development, developing those manuals and plans that are needed for state mandates and for grants and things like that around inclusion and using multi-tiered systems of support to meet the needs of all learners. So it's a personal passion, but it's also a professional passion that transcends my practice as a super, and then now in this role that I have at Rutgers.
Yeah, sure. Interesting. Okay. So long and varied career in K-12, all sorts of experiences and perspectives, I'm sure. And so you talked about their MTSS and how that's kind of your passion and your specialty. Could you talk about that? What led you to that, and how do you see that being just essential? I know you talk a lot about that.
Yeah. So something that I didn't mention, but I used to teach AP Micro and Macroeconomics. So I have always, and I've taught school finance, and once I was done with my doctorate, went back and got an MBA and all those things. So I've always been very, the heart and mind components. I realized early on the importance, the moral imperative of getting as many kids to graduate from high school. It gives them and their families a sense of accomplishment. They feel they belong in American society. And not only that, it affects earnings, it affects civic engagement. Kids who graduate from high school vote more. They're more likely to read a newspaper. So there's all kinds of things associated with that. But then on the economics and finance side, we're spending all kinds of money for public education. And even if you're in a private school or a parochial school, you still get federal funds and some local funds allocated to you. So there's a lot of money and effort and time that gets invested in education. And so from kind of my economics brain, I was trying to look at systems that actually yield success for kids. And so through delving into the research on all those systems, the only system that has really been shown to work to improve outcomes for kids, whether that's getting them to grade level just in time, whether it's identifying them for gifted and talented, whether it's identifying them for special needs services, and the ultimate outcome being that you graduate from high school, has been multi-tiered systems of support. And it's not something new. It evolved from the research of Benjamin Bloom. For a long time, it was called response to intervention. Kind of a watershed moment was Congress's reauthorization of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act back in 2004. And since then, all the guidance has been, states and districts should do this. But there hasn't been this mandate. It's been attached to funding. There hasn't really been an accountability system with it, but that's changing now over time, and COVID really accelerated that. So if you combine the moral imperative of why it matters to what's the ultimate outcome of a good education, and then also what's the return on this investment, MTSS is the system to get to both of those.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, and so that kind of leads us up to your new book that you just released, right? It's All Paths Lead to Graduation, and so. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah,
kind of,
absolutely.
It's the culmination of a lot of your experiences,
so
right?
It's the culmination of about 15 years of research and practice. And coaching districts, definitely my own districts where I was assistant superintendent and superintendent, but so many of the districts that I worked with through Rutgers, and so many of the districts I worked with through my ed tech career, all over the country, really relied on a lot of the things that I had developed, probably around 2014, 15, 16, 17, and kind of aligning those to the research and practices out there about MTSS. So I think it's important to understand that between 2015 and really 2020-ish, we went through the full conversion of response to intervention to multi-tiered systems of support as kind of the nomenclature. So the first chunk of the book, in the preface, I talk about the class of 2032, which were the kindergarten babies who were, during the shutdowns and all the traumatic events of the pandemic, were in kindergarten, and how that robbed them of a normal kindergarten experience, which affected them social emotionally, but also, now with two sets of NAEP scores, 2022 and 2024, only 40% of those kids have proficient reading levels. So, I don't need to have a magic a magic ball to see into the future. Those kids are going to struggle, into high school, because not being on grade level, we have 70 years of research to show that if you're not on grade level for your independent reading level, it affects your math, it affects algebra, it affects your confidence in school, it leads to behavioral issues. So kind of set the stage there. And then I jump into how we went from RTI to MTSS, and what the different state frameworks look like. And I invoke the term equity. So if you go back in time and take a look at my dissertation is actually on school choice, and perception of superintendents who participated in the school choice program on equity. And equity, I know it's a highly politicized term, but it's really making sure every kid gets what they need. That's what equity is, right? And so for me, there's equity in MTSS because we're universally screening every single kid through, screening mechanisms, academic and non-academic, is eligible for intervention and enrichment. So I kind of lay that out, what the screening systems look like, and then get into, well, what does it mean to have tiered supports? How do you go into tier 2 at that first level of intervention, tier 3, which is the highest level of intervention, and kind of, lay that out. And really, most of the states use kind of this umbrella graphic to symbolize all this. So, Texas and California as states politically cannot agree that the sky is blue, yet they have identical MTSS systems, and both use an umbrella to illustrate MTSS. And so under that umbrella is universal screening. It's your academic response to intervention. It's your behavioral response to intervention. Your multi-language learner programs are underneath there, as well as your gifted and talented. So everyone kind of agrees on that now. And so I kind of set the stage there in the beginning for the kind of the first 3 chapters. And then kind of the middle of the book is I get into each of the tiers, and talking about the supreme issue of time in tier 2 and making time for tier 2 interventions. And then I talk about tier 3, which is the most misunderstood tier, because a lot of people just think, oh, tier 3 special ed. Not necessarily. Kids can be receiving tier 3 services, even if they don't have an IEP or a 504. However, a lot of the tier 3 services are under the auspices of individual's education plan or a 504 related to those 2 federal laws. And then I kind of wrap up the book getting into a couple of key issues that are passions of mine that I've seen implementing MTSS all over the country. The first one being about MTSS protocols. All that data of universally screening doesn't just tell you who's at risk, it also tells you who can be pushed. So it's also your equitable mechanism for identifying who needs gifted and talented. That was a major issue when I first arrived as superintendent in Weehawken. And so MTSS helped the kids who needed help, but it also, identified the kids who we could send to, a summer coding program for girls at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. And, it made it equitable and not based upon, biased teacher recommendations, but actually where the kids are at. And then another issue that I hit on is Algebra 1. And for better or worse, when you look at all the research on MTSS, all the research on graduation, Algebra 1 is this gatekeeper. It is, whether we want it to be or not, it is the course that kids struggle the most with. It is a course that we can predict in 3rd grade and 6th grade and 8th grade whether kids are going to be successful. But there's also lots of best practices out there on how to support kids, because once a kid completes Algebra 1, and if they do it before the end of their sophomore year, the rest of the high school career looks like something I can accomplish. But if you failed Algebra 1 and you're a sophomore in class with freshmen, or even worse, you're a junior in class with freshmen, now all of a sudden you feel demoralized. And that 16-year-old brain that's not fully chemically formed starts to think of, bad ideas as good ideas. And that's where we get to a lot of dropouts. And then the last one is on graduation coaches. So graduation coaches, to me, are the ultimate intervention that you can have. And, it's not something that you can buy off a shelf. It's not a piece of software. It's a relationship. So many of these kids who are below grade level for reading or who have failed algebra, when you pull back the layers of the onions, they're lacking relationships in their lives. They don't feel connected at school. And so graduation rates can function in a tier 2 capacity where it's kind of like, hey, I'm here to coach you along. You got things going all right, but you need a little bit of support. And then there's the most intensive graduation coaches where, we passed a policy to allow our graduation coaches to use cell phones, where they're calling kids up at 6 o'clock and being like, hey, all right, you're on the bus, right? You're coming to school today. All right, I'm going to be waiting for you, where kids need that kind of one-to-one management. But for kids who are relationship deficient, they may reject that. A lot of them don't have parents. They're living in foster care or with grandparents. They don't have older brothers and sisters. And this fills that relationship void. And when kids have that relationship void filled and they feel supported and they feel like they belong, all of a sudden, it unlocks all those things in Maslow's hierarchy, and kids feel safe and they're able to learn. And so that's one of the biggest interventions. And then I kind of wrap up with, lessons from being a superintendent and how to strategically plan for all of this. And then, I end on talking about the future of MTSS now that we have the accelerant of AI. So it's kind of a journey from my past over my career and into the future of where MTSS is going.
Yeah, really interesting. You're talking at a high level kind of policy and legislation and how the field in general has kind of thought about these things and transitioned over the last 10 or 15 years or so. And then talking about under this umbrella, all these different student populations that you have, they're all going to have needs. But as your title of the book is All Paths Lead to Graduation, how to get all these different populations, no matter where they are, to get to that finish line, and how you meet each of their individual needs.
Yep. And I'll give you just one statistic, so let's pretend, I always say, let's pretend we don't care about kids. And you're just worried about the return on the investment of your tax dollar. Every kid who does not graduate on time, so within 12 years with their cohort, right, costs the United States economy at a minimum $270,000. $270,000 right there. So if it costs us $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 to do an intervention for kids to get them over that finish line, to fill the relationship void in their lives, it's worth it. It is worth it, so it's something that I think we cared a lot about 15, 20 years ago. And then because of COVID and other policies, it's kind of gotten lost in the sauce, but it's still there. And the issue of attendance and kids not showing up to school is more important than ever.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So yeah, a variety of types of support needed for all these different populations. And then I would imagine that you'd make the case that post that finish line graduation is not the end, obviously, that this has an impact for them, whatever they do post-graduation, right?
That's the next book, right?
Right.
It's so setting kids up. So once you get that diploma, once you have a high school diploma, that qualifies you to enter any trade union, which we desperately need. It qualifies you to then go on to community college. So you might not, do something immediately, right? It also qualifies you to join the military, right? So you might not do something immediately, but you could always join a trade when you're 23. go back to community college when you're 27. It's this essential credential that you need for the rest of your life. And so, the next work I'm working on is all that associated research that, getting kids to pass Algebra 1 by the end of freshman year sets them up not just to graduate, but then for quicker entry into industry or to community college or college right after high school, and how that changes, their economic trajectory. And, not every kid, college is not the solution for every kid. And right now we have a deficit of electricians and plumbers and people in the trades. But all those unions, they require the apprenticeship programs require that you've completed high school, right? So it is, no matter which path you're going to pick, or sometimes both, the high school diploma is that first domino that has to fall before kids can enjoy greater success.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, so you started off talking about the last 10, 15 years, the development of MTSS, and then you mentioned ending on kind of future looking and the impact of AI. You get a sense of where things are headed and the impact of AI. Could you describe that?
Sure. So, RTI was, simply response intervention. And now I think really focused on academics. And so now there's a lot of acceptance on the non-academic factors. If you look at IDEA in 2004, they said behavior, but behavior really is encompassing a lot of things. And so MTSS really is that umbrella for all those elements. And so with that produces a lot more data points. We're not just looking at attendance and discipline and did you finish your course on time? We're looking at all these other factors like, are you free and reduced lunch? Why is it that you might be tardy? Is it because you have to drop off your younger sibling at an elementary school 5 blocks away? Is that why you're late to school every day? So all those other factors matter. So now we've basically expanded the data points exponentially for how we look at a child through that whole child lens. And so that can be really overwhelming. So I can tell you, just making broad generalizations at the elementary grades, they've been more accepting of doing that. The middle schools coming out of the pandemic, because they've been underwater with so many behavioral issues in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade post-pandemic, they've really, come to grips with the fact that they need all these non-academic data points. And high school is kind of just coming to those elements now. But there's some really good shining examples. Georgia, for example, has used graduation coaches with all these data points. I always talk about Clearwater High School in Clearwater, Florida. Montana set up a statewide early warning system. I think one of the best shining examples of success is Miami-Dade. Miami-Dade has 360,000 students, and they just hit a 96% graduation rate. So it can be done. So, when folks are like, I have a school district of 5,000 kids, how am I going to put all these data points together? Well, if you can do it with 360,000 kids, you can do it with 5,000 kids. But the data points are completely overwhelming. So where AI can help us is, in building, early warning systems and what that looks like. All of those early warning systems, kind of, even if you build it through a system like, Power BI or whatever it may be, it's a dashboard. And you're looking at a dashboard and kind of a matrix for each kid. And so you're still relying on a lot of, humans clicking through, and you want that qualitative data element. But where things get lost is we'll identify that kids need help. And I think of a couple of districts that I know out west that have done this. They have great systems that they can, with 99% accuracy, they can predict that a kid's going to drop out based upon the data they identify in 7th grade. And then I say, okay, so what'd you do about it? So how do you take that student profile and connect it to interventions that are actually going to work and that have a high statistical effect size with, predictive, excellence there, that fidelity that it's going to go through. So that's where AI can come in. So first thing that it can do is, one, it can shrink the time of those early warning systems down considerably. So you can basically run your early warning system almost every day. You don't have to do it once a month or quarterly, which was kind of the system we were on. We were on like quarterly benchmark 3 times a year. You can basically have this running every day, and it can flag kids who are at risk. But more importantly, we don't have to wait to have a meeting where there's a whole bunch of professionals in a room. So what are we going to do about Johnny? He's had 2 suspensions and he's reading at a 5th grade level, even though he's 13. What are we going to do about this kid? AI can say, hey, based upon Johnny's profile, these are the suggested interventions. We could match it up with these staff members who are going to oversee it, who's going to implement the intervention, and then that gets presented to the case manager, who can then, employ the human expertise. We're not getting rid of humans, but now they have a whole data set in front of them, and they can tweak it and personalize it to Johnny's needs. But what used to take 9 months, in a long time, and once you identify he needs help in another 3 months before interventions get in place, we can do it in a day, less than a day. And that's where AI is really going to transform this. And so it's going to make the work lives of teachers easier, administrators easier, and it's going to get kids more of that personalized learning in real time where they don't have to wait for services.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Right in line with a lot of technology. They say we've spent so many years collecting more and more and more data. Now the challenge is, what do we do with it now that we have this vast amount of data? And that can be a real challenge to sift through.
Yep.
Interesting. So the book is, again, All Paths Lead to Graduation, and it's available now on Amazon.
And Barnes & Noble soon. It'll be up there, hopefully by the end of the week, but you can get it as an ebook or paperback and hard copy.
All right. Great. Well, thanks so much for being with us. Look forward to it.
Thank you.